There are moments in life when silence feels heavy, when doing the right thing does not look like reward, but like loss. When obedience feels like sacrifice and integrity feels like isolation. And in those moments, many begin to question, did I make the right choice? Why did I walk away? Why does it feel like I lost? When I chose what is right, but hear this message not as noise, not as coincidence, but as a deep spiritual reminder written for your soul. You did the right thing, and you are not forgotten. There are seasons where heaven does not applaud you with immediate results, but it records your obedience in eternal ink. What looked like a delay was not denial. What felt like abandonment was not rejection. It was preparation. It was alignment. It was protection. Because not every open door is from God, and not every closed door is punishment. Sometimes, a closed door is mercy in disguise. You walked away from what compromised your peace. You stepped back from what diluted your purpose. You said no when it would have been easier to say yes. You chose truth over comfort, righteousness over convenience, and integrity over approval. And heaven saw it. Not the crowd, not the critics, not the people who misunderstood you, but heaven saw it. And there is a divine principle that cannot be broken. Obedience always carries favor even when it carries tears in the beginning. Listen carefully. You are in a hidden season, not a forgotten one. You are in a testing season, not a rejected one. You are in a shaping season, not a losing one. Because the same God who allowed the pressure is the same God who measures the timing of your lifting. There are battles you did not fight not because you were weak, but because God was shielding you from wars you were never meant to enter. There are relationships you lost not because you were unworthy, but because they were not aligned with your destiny. There are opportunities that slipped away not because you were overlooked, but because something greater was being protected for you. And I need you to understand this deeply. God's favor does not always feel like ease. Sometimes it feels like being removed, redirected, and refined. You may have cried in private, wondering why your yes to God cost you so much. But hear this truth. What you lost was not your destiny. It was your distraction. And what God is building in you now is not temporary, it is foundational. Something that cannot be shaken by people's opinions, delayed by circumstances, or destroyed by misunderstanding. There is a version of you being formed in this hidden place that cannot be rushed. And when it is time, what you thought was delayed will suddenly reveal itself as divine timing. Because God does not just give blessings, He prepares people to carry them. So if you feel overlooked, you are being positioned. If you feel stretched, you are being strengthened. If you feel alone, you are being separated for assignment, not abandonment. And hear this prophetic reminder. The same God who brought you out of what was not for you is the same God who is bringing you into what cannot be taken from you. So do not regret the right thing you did. Do not question your obedience. Do not trade your peace for pressure, because the favor of God is not loud at first, but it is undeniable in the end. And when your season shifts, when clarity breaks through, when doors begin to open that no man can shut, you will look back and realize it was worth it. Every tear, every number, every step away, every moment of waiting. Because God was not punishing you, He was positioning you. And now this is the final message for your spirit. Stand still, trust deeply, stay faithful. Because the favor of God is not coming toward you, it is already upon you. There are moments in a person's journey with God when obedience does not look victorious in the natural sense. It does not feel like celebration, applause, or reward. Instead, it feels like silence after sacrifice. It feels like walking away from something that once felt important, only to be met with emptiness where comfort used to be. And in those spaces, the human heart begins to question whether doing the right thing was truly worth it. But heaven operates on a different system than human validation. What looks like loss in the physical realm can often be recorded as gain in the spiritual realm. The obedience that cost you everything was not ignored. It was not overlooked. It was not buried in silence. It was observed in detail by the one who sees beyond appearance, beyond timing, beyond emotional interpretation. There is a divine accounting that does not rely on public recognition. There is a record that is written in heaven where every sacrifice made for right. Ousness is stored without loss, without decay, without forgetfulness. You may have chosen to walk away from environments that were familiar but spiritually limiting. You may have stepped out of relationships that were emotionally strong, but spiritually misaligned. You may have chosen silence when speaking would have given you temporary relief, but long-term compromise. And in every one of those decisions, something within you was being weighed, not by people, but by purpose. Obedience is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is painful. Sometimes it is misunderstood. There are forms of obedience that do not receive applause because they are not meant to be validated by crowds. They are meant to be witnessed by God alone. And what is witnessed by God carries a different kind of weight. It carries eternal consequence. There is a hidden dimension to sacrifice that many do not understand. When you obey God in a way that costs you comfort, you are not losing something without return. You are entering a system of spiritual exchange that does not operate on immediate gratification. The world teaches that loss is final, but the kingdom teaches that surrender is seed. And AD never looks like harvest in the beginning. It is buried. It disappears into the ground. It looks forgotten, but it is not forgotten. It is being processed in silence for a future manifestation that cannot be rushed by human emotion. There were decisions you made that did not make sense to others. People may have questioned your direction. Some may have assumed you were acting out of emotion or confusion. But deep inside, there was a conviction that could not be explained in logical terms. That conviction was not your imagination. It was alignment. It was divine instruction speaking louder than external pressure. The cost of obedience is often measured in what you are willing to release. And sometimes what is required is not small. Sometimes it is identity, familiarity, connection, or expectation. And when you release those things, the natural mind interprets it as loss. But in the spiritual realm, it is recognized as agreement. Agreement with a higher direction. Agreement with a path that does not always feel comfortable, but is ultimately purposeful. There is a refining process hidden within obedience that strips away dependency on visible results. It teaches endurance with immediate reward. It develops trust without physical evidence. It strengthens faith in the absence of confirmation. And this process is not punishment. It is preparation for capacity. Because what God is preparing for you cannot be carried by the version of you that only survives on visible proof. There is a deeper version of you being formed in the unseen space, one that will not collapse under delay, misunderstanding, or silence. That version is being built through decisions that require surrender without explanation. You did not just walk away from situations. You stepped into alignment with a divine instruction that demanded trust without clarity. And that kind of trust is rare because it does not rely on outcomes to validate itself. It relies on obedience alone. There are seasons where obedience feels like isolation. Not because you are truly alone, but because separation is part of formation. When God separates, He is not rejecting. He is refining focus. He is removing interference. He is pulling you away from voices that would dilute what He is trying to strengthen within you. And in that separation, silence becomes a teacher. It exposes what truly holds your confidence. It reveals whether your foundation is built on approval or conviction. It shows you the difference between emotional dependence and spiritual stability. The obedience that cost you everything was not a mistake in timing. It was not a miscalculation. It was not an emotional reaction that went unnoticed by heaven. It was intentional alignment with a path that requires maturity to understand. Because not every season is designed to make sense while you are in it. some seasons only reveal their purpose after they have passed. There is also a spiritual resistance that often follows obedience. When you choose what is right over what is easy, there is often a pressure that follows. Not because you are off track, but because resistance often intensifies when alignment begins. The pressure is not proof of error. It is often proof of positioning. And even in the weight of that pressure, something sacred is happening. Your spiritual senses are becoming sharper. Your discernment is becoming clearer. Your dependence on external validation is being weakened. And what remains is a more stable foundation that does not collapse when circumstances shift. The obedience that cost you everything. G is not the end of your story. It is a foundational moment that will later be recognized as necessary. It is one of those hidden turning points that does not reveal its significance immediately. But over time, it becomes clear that what you released was not wasted, and what you walked away from was not your inheritance. There are paths in life that feel meaningful at the time you walk them, yet something deep inside begins to whisper that not everything that feels right is actually aligned. There are connections, opportunities, environments, and even versions of identity that once felt like they were part of your destiny, but over time, a quiet shift begins to happen in your spirit. It does not always come with warning signs that are visible to others. Instead, it comes as an internal tension, a growing awareness that you are no longer fitting where you once easily belonged. And when you respond to that inner leading and choose to walk away, it can feel like loss, confusion, or even regret in the aftermath. But what you walked away from was never your destiny, even if it once looked like it carried the shape of it. There are things in life that are permitted for a season but not assigned for a lifetime. And one of the most difficult spiritual lessons is learning to discern the difference between what is allowed and what is appointed. Permission does not always mean possession. Just because something entered your life does not mean it was meant to remain there. Some experiences are allowed to pass through your story only to reveal something deeper within you, to expose your values, to refine your direction, to awaken your discernment. And once that purpose is fulfilled, holding on to it beyond its season becomes a form of resistance to your own progression. You may have looked back at what you left behind and felt the emotional weight of familiarity trying to pull you into questioning your decision. The mind often romanticizes what is no longer present, especially when the present feels uncertain. It begins to filter out the pain that existed within those spaces and magnifies the comfort you once felt. But clarity does not always come from memory. It comes from revelation over time. What felt stable may have been silently misaligned. What felt secure may have been quietly limiting. What felt like connection may have been gradually disconnecting you from what you were becoming. There are environments that can nurture your current season but restrict your future growth. And staying in such environments too long can create a sense of internal stagnation that is hard to identify while you are inside of it. You may still be functioning, still be achieving, still be interacting, but something within begins to slow down. Creativity becomes muted, peace becomes inconsistent, purpose feels blurred, and often you cannot fully name what is wrong, but you can sense that something is no longer flowing the way it once did. That awareness itself is not confusion, it is awakening. What you walked away from may have once felt like alignment, but alignment is not static. It evolves with your growth. Something that once matched your emotional or mental state may no longer match your spiritual direction. And when growth begins to outpace environment, tension is inevitable. That tension is not punishment, it is transition pressure. It is the internal signal that you are being invited into a different space of existence that requires different conditions to survive and thrive. There is also a deeper reality that what you thought you were losing may have actually been a form of protection in disguise. Sometimes attachment clouds perception. You can become emotionally invested in what is not spiritually assigned, and that emotional investment can make departure feel like failure. But not every exit is loss. Some exits are rescue points. Some departures are mercy disguised as disruption. Some endings are simply the removal of something that could not carry you into what is ahead. When you chose to walk away, it may not have felt powerful at the time. It may have felt like breaking, like uncertainty, like stepping into unknown space without guarantee of what comes next. But obedience in transition is not always validated immediately by visible reward. It is validated by alignment with what you cannot yet see. And often, clarity only arrives after distance has been created. Only when you are no longer inside the pattern do you begin to see the pattern for what it truly was. There is also a spiritual principle that misalignment often feels comfortable before it feels revealing. It does not always announce itself as wrong in the beginning. It integrates slowly, subtly, until dependency forms. And once dependency is formed, detachment. Feels like loss, even when it is actually liberation. That is why walking away can feel heavier than staying, even when staying would have cost more in the long run. The emotional weight of familiarity can sometimes disguise the reality of limitation. What you walked away from may not have been able to carry the fullness of who you are becoming. And there is a version of you that is still unfolding beyond the boundaries of what you previously accepted as normal. That version requires space, clarity, and environments that are not constrained by old definitions of identity or purpose. Growth often demands separation from what cannot expand with it. There is also an unseen mercy in distance. Distance reveals truth without emotional distortion. It allows you to see without being entangled. It allows reflection without interference. And in that reflection, patterns become visible that were once hidden by proximity. You begin to notice what drained you, what limited you, what required you to shrink in order to fit. And those realizations do not come to condemn your past choices, but to affirm your current direction. Even the pain associated with walking away carries instruction within. In it teaches discernment. It strengthens clarity. It refines sensitivity to alignment. And over time, what once felt like regret begins to transform into understanding. Not everything is meant to remain in order for you to move forward. Some things only exist to bring you to the point of decision, and once that decision is made, their role in your story is complete. There is a quiet unfolding happening in your life that is not dependent on what you left behind. It is dependent on what you are now free to become because of that release. And freedom does not always feel immediate. Sometimes it feels like emptiness before it feels like expansion. But emptiness is not absence, it is space being prepared for something that cannot enter while old structures still occupy the space. What you walked away from was never your destiny, because destiny does not require you to consistently compromise your peace in order to remain connected to it. Destiny does not repeatedly diminish your clarity. Destiny does not continuously create internal conflict that drains your alignment. And anything that consistently pulls you away from your core truth is not aligned with your ultimate direction, etc. If it once felt significant or meaningful, and as distance continues to grow, what once felt like confusion begins to settle into understanding that was not accessible. While still inside of it, there are seasons in life where silence becomes louder than answers, where waiting feels heavier than movement, and where the absence of immediate clarity begins to challenge the strength of faith itself. In those seasons, it is easy for the human heart to misinterpret stillness as rejection and delay as abandonment. But there is a deeper reality operating beneath what is visible, a divine strategy that does not always announce itself in advance. What you are experiencing is not evidence of being forgotten. It is evidence of being formed in a hidden place where outcomes are not yet ready to be revealed. The silent season is not empty. It is not inactive. It is not the absence of God's attention. It is a structured process where unseen alignment is taking place beyond the reach of emotional interpretation. Many assume that progress must always be loud, measurable, or externally validated. But the most significant transformations often occur in silence, where no one can interfere with the awakening process. There is a reason why some things are not explained while they are happening, because explanation would interrupt the depth of development required for what is being prepared. There are layers of preparation that cannot coexist with constant visibility. In order for certain qualities to be formed within you, distractions must be reduced, and external validation must lose its influence. The silent season strips away dependence on immediate feedback. It removes the need for constant confirmation from others. It teaches endurance without applause and faith without visible reinforcement. And while that can feel uncomfortable, it is intentionally designed to strengthen something within you that cannot be developed in environments of constant noise. You may find yourself questioning why nothing seems to be changing on the surface while everything feels intense internally. But silence is often where the deepest restructuring occurs. Foundations are not built where everything is visible. They are built beneath the surface, where pressure is applied consistently and transformation happens gradually. What feels like stagnation is often internal realignment. What feels like a why is often recalibration. What feels like absence is often refinement in progress. There are things God removes in silence before He replaces anything in visibility. This is because premature exposure can disrupt what is still fragile in formation. There are emotional dependencies, thought patterns, attachments, and distractions that must be dismantled quietly so that they do not interfere with what is being constructed. If everything were revealed at once, the weight of what is coming would overwhelm the capacity of what is still being developed in the silent season. Perception is tested. What you believe about God when nothing is changing becomes more important than what you believe when everything is moving. Faith is not measured by reaction to breakthroughs alone, but by stability in stillness. It is in silence that trust becomes refined, because trust that only exists in visible movement is not fully matured. There is a depth of relationship with God that only forms when external indicators are removed, and internal conviction becomes the primary anchor. This season also exposes what was previously masked by activity. When everything slows down externally, internal realities become more noticeable. Thoughts that were once drowned out by distraction become louder. Emotions that were previously ignored begin to surface. Questions that were postponed begin to demand attention. And while this can feel overwhelming, it is not meant to break you, but to reveal areas that require healing, strengthening, or surrender before the next stage of assignment can be safely introduced. There is also a divine protection embedded in silence. Not everything is ready to be seen by others while it is still being shaped. Exposure too early can attract interference, misunderstanding, or premature conclusions that distort what is still in development. Silence acts as a covering that shields the process from external disruption. It ensures that what is being formed is not prematurely influenced by opinions, pressure, or comparison. There is wisdom in hiddenness that protects the integrity of what is still growing. You may feel like nothing is happening because nothing is being announced. But heaven does not require public acknowledgement to initiate movement. Some of the most significant shifts begin without visibility. Doors can be positioning themselves long before they are open, penned. Opportunities can be aligning long before they are revealed. Connections can be preparing long before they appear. And while none of this is yet visible, it does not mean it is not already in motion within the unseen structure of divine timing. The silence is also teaching restraint. It is training you not to force outcomes, not to rush clarity, and not to manipulate timing out of anxiety. There is a maturity that develops when you learn to remain steady without demanding immediate answers. That maturity becomes essential for what is ahead, because what is coming will require stability under pressure, not impulsive reaction. Silence builds the internal capacity to remain grounded when things begin to move rapidly. There are also spiritual recalibrations happening in this season that cannot be rushed. Alignment is not only about direction, it is about timing, readiness, and internal synchronization. If something is placed too early, it can collapse under the weight of immaturity. If something is revealed too soon, it can be misinterpreted and mishandled. Silence ensures that when movement does come, it is sustainable, not temporary, and not emotionally driven. In this hidden process, identity is also being refined. What you believe about yourself when no external validation is present becomes foundational for what you will carry forward. If identity is dependent on external confirmation, it cannot survive in higher levels of responsibility. So silence strips away dependence on recognition so that what remains is rooted in conviction. Rather than reaction, there is also a deep restructuring of desire that happens in silence. What you once thought you needed begins to lose its emotional grip. What once felt essential begins to lose urgency. And what once felt like delay begins to reveal itself as protection from attachment to things that were never meant to define your long-term direction. This shift is subtle but profound because it realigns internal priorities without force. Even though it may feel like nothing is happening, you are being positioned in ways that cannot yet be measured. Positioning is not always visible. Sometimes it is internal adjustment. Sometimes it is separation from distractions. Sometimes it is strengthening endurance. Sometimes it is the quiet removal of misalignment. All of it is preparation, even when it does not resemble prog. Rest in the way progress is commonly understood. The silent season is not a pause in purpose. It is purpose being protected while it is prepared. It is not absence of divine activity. It is divine activity happening beneath perception, shaping outcomes that cannot yet be revealed because they require completion before exposure. And while you may not see movement, you are being moved into place in ways that will only become clear when timing shifts and what was hidden becomes visible. There are experiences in life where isolation feels personal, where being unseen feels like rejection, and where silence begins to whisper questions that challenge your worth, your direction, and even your faith. But not every form of being alone is abandonment, and not every season of distance is disconnection. There are times when what feels like being forgotten is actually a deliberate act of divine separation, a process where you are removed from familiar noise so that something deeper within you can be rebuilt without interference. Hiddenness is often misunderstood because it does not match human expectations of progress. In a world where visibility is equated with value, being out of sight can feel like being out of purpose. But in spiritual reality, visibility is not the measure of significance. There are processes that require concealment in order to preserve integrity. What is being shaped in you is not meant to be constantly exposed to external influence while it is still forming. There is a divine wisdom in covering, a protective removal from environments, voices, and patterns that would distort what is still under construction. You were not abandoned in the hidden place. You were placed there with intention. There are dimensions of growth that cannot occur under constant observation or in environments where opinions are loud and influence is constant. In hiddenness, the pressure of external expectation is removed so that internal formation can take place without distortion. It is in this space that identity becomes solidified, not through validation, but through quiet transformation that does not depend on audience approval. There is also a recalibration happening in hidden seasons that is not immediately recognizable. The way you think, respond, interpret, and perceive begins to shift gradually. Old patterns that once guided your decisions begin to lose their author. Emotional reactions that once dominated your responses begin to weaken. And in their place, a quieter form of discernment begins to develop, one that is less dependent on impulse and more rooted in clarity that comes from depth, rather than urgency. Being hidden does not mean being inactive. It means being processed beyond the reach of external measurement. Growth is not always visible, and some of the most important transformations cannot be observed from the outside. Just as roots grow in darkness before anything appears above the surface, there is unseen development happening within you that will later support everything that becomes visible in your life. Without this hidden root system, What appears externally would not have stability. There are also layers of separation that occur in hidden seasons that are not always emotionally easy to understand. Certain connections begin to lose their relevance. Certain environments no longer resonate the same way. Certain conversations begin to feel misaligned. This is not accidental distancing, but gradual repositioning. What once felt necessary begins to feel heavy, not because it has changed externally, but because you have changed internally. And that internal change requires external realignment. Hiddenness also removes the distraction of comparison. When you are no longer constantly exposed to the visible progress of others, something within you is forced to develop at its own pace. Comparison often distorts timing, making you feel delayed when you are actually being developed. In hidden seasons, that distortion begins to lose its influence. You are no longer measuring your life against external timelines, but instead becoming more aware of internal formation that does not operate on visible schedules. There is a refining process in hiddenness that strips away performance-based identity. When you are not constantly being seen, you are no longer able to rely on appearance, achievement, or external recognition to define your sense of worth. What remains is something deeper, something more stable, something less dependent on external reinforcement. This is where authenticity is formed, where identity is no longer shaped by response from others, but by internal alignment with truth. In this hidden place, God is not absent. He is intentionally present in a different way. Not always through visible movement, but through internal shaping. Not always through immediate answers, but through quiet transformation. Not always through external change, but through internal strengthening. This form of divine attention is not always recognizable in real time because it does not always produce immediate results. But it produces lasting stability. There is also a dismantling that occurs in hidden seasons. Not destruction, but deconstruction of what cannot support your next level. Certain dependencies begin to loosen. Certain expectations begin to dissolve. Certain emotional attachments begin to weaken. And while this can feel like loss, it is actually removal of weight that would hinder future capacity. What feels like emptiness is often space being created for something that requires room to exist. Without competition from what is no longer aligned, hiddenness teaches endurance without validation. It teaches consistency without applause. It teaches faith without visible confirmation. These lessons are not comfortable, but they are essential for maturity. Because what is being prepared for you will require stability that is not dependent on external reassurance. It will require depth that is not shaken by silence. It will require conviction that does not collapse under delay. There is also a strengthening of discernment that happens in hiddenness. When distractions are reduced, sensitivity increases. You begin to notice what is aligned and what is not with greater clarity. You become more aware of internal signals that were previously ignored. You begin to understand patterns more deeply, not from observation alone, but from internal recognition that has been refined through stillness. Hiddenness also protects what is still fragile. There are aspects of your development that cannot withstand premature exposure. If revealed too early, they could be influenced, misinterpreted, or destabilized by external pressure. So concealment becomes protection, not punishment. It ensures that what is being formed is not interrupted before it reaches stability. Even though it may feel like nothing is happening, something significant is being established beneath perception. Foundations are being set in place that will support future visibility. Structures are being formed internally that will sustain external responsibility. And while none of this is yet visible, it is real, it is active, and is intentional. There is also a quiet preparation of timing taking place in hiddenness. Not everything is meant to be revealed simultaneously with its formation. Timing is part of protection. Timing ensures readiness. Timing ensures sustainability. And in hidden seasons, timing is being aligned with internal development so that when visibility returns, It does not overwhelm what has been built. You are not being hidden because you are insignificant. You are being hidden because what is being developed within you requires protection from premature exposure. There is a version of you being formed in this concealed place that is not dependent on external validation, not influenced by comparison, and not unstable under pressure. That version is being shaped in silence where only transformation is allowed to speak. And even though hiddenness can feel like delay, it is actually alignment in progress, ensuring that when emergence happens, it is not fragile, not incomplete, and not unprepared. There are moments in life when everything feels suspended between what was and what is not yet visible. You sense movement in the spirit before you see movement in your circumstances. You feel transgender, Ishan, before anything around you changes shape. And in those moments, it can seem as though nothing is happening, but in truth, something irreversible is already in motion beneath the surface of your life. The shift is not waiting for permission from what is visible. It is already being established in a realm that precedes physical evidence. There is a divine timing to everything that God orchestrates. And when that timing reaches its point of activation, what has been hidden begins to surface without struggle. The shift is not always announced by noise, nor is it always introduced by obvious signals. Sometimes it begins quietly, almost unnoticeably, like a subtle repositioning of circumstances, relationships, opportunities, and internal awareness that only becomes clear after it has already begun. You may find that things you once struggled to maintain begin to naturally fall away without effort. Connections that once required emotional strength to sustain begin to loosen without resistance. Environments that once felt stable begin to feel misaligned without clear explanation. This is not confusion, it is alignment unfolding. The shift often begins by removing what can no longer accompany you into the next dimension of your purpose. At the same time, new clarity begins to emerge in ways that were not accessible before. Decisions that once felt complicated begin to feel simple. Paths that once felt uncertain begin to reveal direction without force. Internal resistance begins to weaken, not because challenges are disappearing, but because your capacity to understand and navigate them is expanding. This is part of the shift, the internal adjustment that prepares you to handle what is about to become visible. There is also a deep recalibration happening in how you perceive timing itself. What once felt like delay begins to be understood as preparation. What once felt like silence begins to be recognized as positioning. What once felt like stagnation begins to reveal itself as stability being formed beneath movement. The shift changes not only your circumstances, but your interpretation of those circumstances. In this process, God's favor begins to operate in ways that are not always immediately recognized as favor. Favor does not always appear as ease. Sometimes it appears as access without effort. Sometimes it appears as doors opening without explanation. It appears as alignment that cannot be traced back to human strategy. And sometimes it appears as protection that you only understand after something has been removed from your path. There is a difference between striving and being carried by favor. Striving requires constant exertion, constant adjustment, constant pressure to maintain outcomes. Favor, however, introduces a kind of divine acceleration that cannot be replicated by effort alone. When favor is active, what once required prolonged struggle begins to unfold with unexpected ease, not because effort disappears, but because resistance is removed from the process. The shift also begins to reveal evidence of divine orchestration in hindsight. You begin to notice that what seemed random was actually arranged. What seemed delayed was actually timed. What seemed disconnected was actually being woven together in a pattern that only becomes visible after distance has been created. Favor often becomes clearer when you look back and realize that what could have failed did not, and what should have ended prematurely was held together by something beyond your control. There is also a transformation in how you respond to uncertainty during this shift. Where anxiety once tried to dominate, a deeper form of trust begins to take root. This trust is not based on visible proof, but on internal assurance that something greater is unfolding even when details are not yet revealed. It is a quiet confidence that does not require constant confirmation to remain stable as the shift continues. Certain opportunities begin to appear that feel unusually aligned, almost as if they were waiting for you rather than you searching for them. These opportunities do not carry the same weight of struggle that previous ones carried. Instead, they come with a sense of recognition, as though something within you already matches what is being presented externally. This is favor creating connection points that are not forced but synchronized. There is also a deep restructuring of identity taking place during this time. You begin to shed versions of yourself that were shaped by survival, by limitation, by past environments. And in their place, a more grounded version of you begins to emerge, one that is not defined by previous struggle but by present alignment. This shift in identity is subtle but profound because it changes how you see, arrange yourself into new spaces. Favor also begins to interrupt cycles that previously felt repetitive. Patterns that once repeated without explanation begin to break without your direct intervention. Situations that once returned in similar forms begin to lose their grip on your life. This interruption is not random, it is the evidence of a higher order restructuring your environment so that repetition of limitation no longer defines your experience in this unfolding. Relationships also begin to reorganize themselves. Some connections deepen naturally without effort, while others quietly fade without conflict. The shift does not always require confrontation, it often requires alignment, and alignment itself becomes the filter through which people, places, and opportunities are either sustained or released. There is also a growing awareness that what is coming is not dependent on your ability to force it, but on your ability to remain aligned with it. Favor does not respond to desperation, it responds to readiness. And readiness is not only external preparation, but internal stability. The shift is shaping you into someone who can carry what is being released without collapsing under its weight. Even your perception of time begins to change. What once felt slow begins to feel purposeful. What once felt delayed begins to feel precise. What once felt like waiting begins to feel like positioning. Time itself begins to lose its ability to create frustration, because understanding begins to replace uncertainty, and in the midst of all of this, there is a quiet assurance building within you that cannot be easily shaken. It is not loud, it is not performative, it is not dependent on external validation. It is a settled knowing that what is unfolding is not accidental, not random, not disconnected, but carefully directed toward a moment where clarity will replace confusion and manifestation will confirm what has long been forming unseen.